In case you don't know, Reina means the queen. Well, I get interested in things now and then. Hope, loving kindness, and I got interested in this idea of self-actualization that's been around for a long time, and began asking myself, what does it mean? And so that's what I'm talking about today. Let's see, there we go. I do come from New Mexico, land I've come to love and feel very much at home in. It is another land where indigenous people lived there for thousands of years, literally thousands of years before European settlers came. People who are very spiritually bound to the land. People of Tiwa, Tewa, Kirasan languages. And so I'm also happy to acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on right now is also the traditional home of Maori people, and we honor their care for the land and their traditions. May we have that kind of openness and willingness to get a big picture. So motivational interviewing is a person-centered approach. It comes from the work of Carl Rogers. I aspire to his hairstyle eventually. And the person-centered approach was called a third force in psychology. There was psychoanalysis, and then there was behaviorism, and then along came Rogers and Maslow and this tradition. In a way, pushing back against two traditions that see behavior as predetermined, as already decided by your genes and your history. And Rogers and others said, no, that's not true. We also have freedom. We also make choices. And I think of choice as another influence on behavior. Clearly our genetics do influence us. Clearly our history does influence us. And in addition to that, we make choices, and those choices matter. I wrote a paper once at the bottom here called Free Will as a Proportion of Variance. How much of the variance in behavior can be determined by our choices. We are a tribe of the person-centered nation. This book by Nick Cooper has chapters on all the various tribes of the person-centered world. Person-centered therapy, or client-centered counseling, is the original one. But then there's Eugene Gendlich's focusing therapy, emotion-focused therapy that had a workshop on here, experiential counseling, and now motivational interviewing is officially a tribe of the person-centered nation as well. And person-centered approaches were around before Carl Rogers and since Carl Rogers, so it's just not only Carl Rogers. I think they began in education. The earliest references I can find are the beginning of the 20th century in education, around student-centered teaching or student-centered learning. And here's a quote from 1911 from a high school around New York. We are a person-centered high school. The person is the one we are teaching. We don't teach subjects, we teach people. Then in the 1940s, found its way into healthcare, particularly in nursing. It landed first in nursing, and then eventually spread into medicine and other specialties. And the idea was to individualize treatment, not be giving the same treatment to everybody, and to particularly emphasize the relationship between the nurse, the physician, and the patient, that the relationship really matters. And of course that sounds familiar to you. And empowering patients to have a role in their own treatment, to be actively involved in their own health and recognizing and honoring that they had choices to make. And then along came Carl Rogers with client-centered counseling and client-centered psychotherapy, and Abraham Maslow at the same time, with a more humanistic kind of approach to psychology. And Rogers highlighted these three characteristics. He was actually interested in what is it that we do that actually helps people to change. And he didn't start with a theory, nor did Motivational Interviewing start with a theory. He started by observing counseling sessions, and this was early in the ability to actually record sessions and listen to them. And so his group was listening to sessions and saying, what do you suppose is happening here that might benefit clients, that might help them to change? And not just guessing, actually, but figuring out how to measure things that are happening during counseling, and also measure client outcomes, which was a relatively new idea at the time. And then say, what, of the things that we're looking at, which things seem to really benefit clients, without assuming that he knew to begin with. And so empathy, top of his list, good listening, stepping into the framework of the client to see the world through their eyes, one of those things. Accepting people as they are. No need to prove to you that they deserve respect, for they do. And being yourself. Those were Rogers' three characteristics that they learned how to measure and demonstrated that those are all related to better client outcomes. Well, a person-centered approach has found its way into so many fields. With Mick Cooper in the UK now, we're putting together a book on fields outside of psychotherapy and counseling where a person-centered approach has had a major impact. And one of them is parenting. Tom Gordon was one of Carl Rogers' students, and in 1970 published Parent Effectiveness Training, which is essentially Carl Rogers in everyday language that parents could understand. And then Nonviolent Communication, authored by an Albuquerque resident. And Patient-Centered Healthcare. Here's Tom Gordon partnering with the chair of our surgery department at New Mexico, making the patient your partner. And student-centered education, still very much around. And person-centered spiritual care. And life and health coaching, the newest book on motivational interviewing from Guilford Press. First book now in the Guilford series on coaching. And thanks to Steve Rolnick and his colleagues, a person-centered way of being a coach in sport. Different approach from the usual stereotype of coaches giving orders and barking criticism and so forth. And in leadership and organizational development. So many fields outside of the ones that most of us work in, helping professions, but not counseling and psychotherapy. And a person-centered approach has landed there too. In motivational interviewing, focusing is where we try to figure out where we're going. That's the question underlying focusing. The question underlying engaging is, can we take a walk together? And then the second question is, where are we going? And where are we going in motivational interviewing? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to help people to change and grow? Well, listening well is certainly an important piece of focusing. And coming up with goals, shared goals, so that you and your client agree, yes, let's move in that direction. Let's go there together. And part of our job is to keep our eyes on the horizon, to remember where it is we're trying to go, because all kinds of chaos can arise over the course of consultation. And you deal with that and help people to get through that. But you also remember where you're trying to go and always trying to keep moving in that direction. And we know that the focus can change also over time. But what goals? What are the goals that we're moving toward? Well, one thing that we say in our books in motivational interviewing is usually it comes from the client. Usually we're moving in a particular direction because that's what the client asks us to do. Sometimes it arises from the context. If you work in a smoking cessation clinic, there's no mystery about what the topic of conversation is going to be. We'll be talking about smoking. If you're a probation officer, you have a certain focus and responsibility, not just to the client, but to society. And then sometimes it comes from us. As we're working with someone, we see something that maybe is underlying the problem, or something that also needs attention. And so we raise it as a possibility, as a focus. But ultimately, it's the client who chooses. It's not a goal until the client shares it. Well, what's going on in psychotherapy? I guess the traditional idea is that you're trying to help people come back to normality, whatever that is, which is the absence of suffering and the absence of diagnosable disorders. But we now have 297 disorders, not counting the V codes and the D codes, and having none of those is a kind of unrealistic goal, I think. Positive psychology focuses more on mental health, so helping people to move toward health. And then there's a skeptical view that what's going on in psychotherapy actually is trying to persuade people to be like the rest of us, to be normal, to not deviate from social norms, from socially accepted values. And then along came Rogers, initially with the idea of being non-directive, of not having a goal. Working together with the client, but you're not trying to move in a particular direction. Now, Rogers himself let go of that term in favor of client-centered, in favor of person-centered over time. But it is kind of where he started. But then he sort of changed his mind, as we'll see in a bit, about whether there is direction or not. I began going to meetings of classic Rogerians, the person-centered community. First, the Carl Rogers Birthday Conference in California. So I'm meeting with students and colleagues of Rogers and their own students. A world that's interestingly had very little commerce with motivational interviewing, even though that's where we come from. And then I went to the World Conference in Copenhagen, again, with classic person-centered people. And I was a little worried, because we have focus, we have direction, we have goals. And I worked in addiction treatment in particular, and when you work in addiction treatment, you have goals. I mean, there are things that you're hoping will change. So I began having conversations with these students and colleagues at Rogers and saying, what do you think about this? That when someone walks into our treatment center, we are hoping to help them to let go of these drugs that are capturing them. And absolute normative response was, well, if there's something that's interfering with a client's natural growth, of course it would be a goal for you to treat that, to resolve that. No problem. It didn't seem to be an issue. I mean, in fact, direction is increasingly clear in person-centered communities. Maslow also talked about people not only have freedom, but they're motivated to move in a particular direction, to move toward their potential, to move toward who they are. And becoming who you are is at the top of this hierarchy of needs. Called it self-actualization. And you'll notice in the 4th edition, we added the word grow. So not just making discrete changes, but sometimes when you're using motivational interviewing, you're someone who works with people over time. You're a teacher. You're a mentor. You're a coach. You're a guide. So it's not just about fixing a problem right now. It's helping people to grow and to mature and to make changes over time. But grow toward what? Well, then there's this word actualize. It's an old word, early 19th century, as it turns out, early 1800s. means to make real, to make actual, to come into being, to fulfill. And actualization is the realization of whatever it is you're trying to realize or trying to fulfill, or whatever potential it is that you're trying to move toward. And that is a very central construct in person-centered approaches. So what are we trying to actualize when doing motivational interviewing or person-centered counseling? What's the horizon? What are we trying to move toward? It's clear that we as helpers influence what clients choose to do. That's part of what's going on with motivational interviewing. Originally, it was helping clients who were drinking too much and destroying their lives in the process to choose to make a change in their drinking. So in a way, we're in the business of helping people make choices to move in a particular direction. And it's clear from MI research that that is possible. You may know this graph from one of Terry Moyer's, Lisa Lynn's studies, that going back and forth between motivational interviewing, the green bars are change talk, the red bars are sustained talk. Going back and forth between motivational interviewing and functional analysis, they reverse directions. So how much change talk and how much sustained talk you're getting is very much a function of what you're doing. Contingency management, operant conditioning, operant research. Clear that consequences influence what people choose to do. There's a huge research on persuasion, on things that we do with each other that begin to nudge and move people in a particular direction. Advertising is all about that. The reason why people put so much money into advertising is it works. It does influence choices. And in politics, also, people are at least trying to do things that will influence the choices that people make when they go into the voting booth. So we're kind of in that business also. But choosing to do what? Well, this is the way my brain works. I get interested in something like loving kindness, and if you know my book on that subject, I came up with 12 different things that actualize loving kindness. So it's an aspiration, it's something we may say, yeah, I want to have more loving kindness in my life, but what does that actually look like? What's the behavior? How do you do that? I get interested in that, and so that's where that book came from. So that's final product of the Living School, actually, we were talking about. Or hope, my more recent book. Just got fascinated by that topic in a time when we very much need hope. I said, well, but what do we know about it? So I read all the research I could find, and scholarship, and philosophy, and lots of fields. And it was clear to me that hope is not one single thing. It's not monolithic. It's a variety of things. They're related to each other. They all have to do with seeing and moving toward a brighter future, and yet quite different human experiences. And so the book's called 8 Ways to Hope. Eight different facets of this diamond of hope. And that's the way my brain works, and that's what happened with actualization too. So I'm going to talk about 6 different ways to understand actualization, self-actualization. What's actually going on here? And all of these are legit. They're all, in fact, they're all things that particular schools or writers have aspired to. One is just choice, being conscious that we make choice. If you know books on schools of psychotherapy, often a person-centered approach and an existential approach get put in the same chapter as relatives of each other. And they aren't similar in many ways. They're both about freedom and choice. But an existential position, an existential philosophy, really eschews any absolutes. That there are no absolute truths. There is no external order. There is no ultimate truth. There is no essential human nature. All we have in the way of meaning is whatever meaning we make for ourselves. We choose for ourselves. That's a particular way of looking at things. A little different from Rogers, certainly. Different from most person-centered writers. And much more like a postmodern way of thinking, that everything is relative, everything is subjective. There is overlap, for sure. That emphasis on freedom of choice is there in both of them, and helping people recognize and embrace choices. Maslow, I found this interesting Maslow quote, "We can consider the process of health to be a never-ending series of free choice situations." Always making choices that gradually shape who you are, who you become. So one way of thinking about self-actualization is just helping people to recognize their choices and to own their choices and be responsible for the choices that they make in their life. That's kind of an existential counseling approach. But beyond just recognizing that you have choices, accepting who you are. Acceptance is one of the elements of the spirit of motivational interviewing. Rogers had this interesting perspective on acceptance. And when people came to him, he accepted whatever they brought with them. It was, again, you don't have to prove that you deserve curiosity and interest and respect to Carl Rogers. It's already there by virtue of your human nature. And he was interested in helping people to accept whatever it is that they were experiencing, and thought that pathology, suffering, comes from people trying to not experience what they're actually experiencing, trying to say, that's not me. If you are familiar with Carl Jung, he called this the shadow. Those parts of ourselves that are real parts of ourselves that we don't want to see. Say, that's not me. Push it aside. So, in Rogers' view, mental health is about the convergence of your self-concept, how you understand who you are, and what you actually experience. And you're not pushing out of consciousness or out of acceptability things that you really do experience. So it's kind of accepting what you do experience in your life. Rogers calls it congruence, which is also one of the characteristics of effective counselors, by the way. So, self-actualization can be learning to accept whatever you're experiencing, whatever experiences you happen to be having, whatever feelings you have, your own attitudes, and also being aware of and in tune to external reality as it really exists. So not denying and trying to change what it is. And Rogers has this quote that you've seen in my own writing, that the strange thing is that when you experience yourself as being unacceptable, you can't change. It paralyzes you. And when you experience being accepted just as you are, by a therapist, by a friend, by family, by God, whatever the source, when you experience that kind of acceptance as you are, it becomes possible to change. Now, I don't know why we're wired that way, but it seems to be true. It's a strange thing, and Rogers saw it. Well, beyond just accepting, there's appreciating who you are, liking who you are, self-esteem. Rogers talked about prizing as one of the things that effective counselors do. You're really interested in and appreciate things about people. So now we have a little bit of an evaluative element added here in Rogers, to not just see your experience, but to accept it and say, that's who I am. It gets called self-esteem in a way. And Rogers thought that that also was one outcome of client-centered counseling. That people come to prize themselves, to approve of themselves in a way. Here's from a case study that I found in a wonderful little paper. If you haven't ever read this one, it came out in his 1980 book, A Way of Being. When I found that book, his last book, I literally wept because it's so how I understand motivational interviewing as well. This is a way of being. But it's a collection of writings. And one of the chapters is called Empathic, an Unappreciated Way of Being. A lovely little article by Paul Rogers. And there's a case study in there. But he says, it is, I believe, the therapist's caring understanding which has permitted this client to experience a high regard, even a love for himself. So that another thing that therapy can do, perhaps, is to help people to appreciate and love themselves. Different understanding from the first two. Number 4, our values. Values are kind of enduring beliefs. They don't change so much over time. They can and do change, but they tend to come with us through time. And a traditional difference in the study of values is between instrumental values, which is our sense of how we should be, and terminal values, which is goals that we should be moving toward. So how should I be in the world, and what should I be pursuing in the world? Again, these are both values, but examples of instrumental values: loving kindness, forgiveness, fairness, things that I try to be in my life. And then terminal values: freedom for people to be able to make choices, peace in the world, just things that we have as goals. So these are a little more stable than just plain old attitudes. And ambivalence, something that we've been interested in motivational interviewing for a long time. When you come to a place where you have a choice, you kind of want both things. Part of you wants to go there and part of you wants to go there. Those are the choices that shape who you are over time. They have consequences. And so you're shaping your identity, you're shaping your life in making value choices. So, folks interested in motivational interviewing, some have also been interested in values and how that gets incorporated. Certainly helping people to become aware of what do you value most, what's most important to you. The values clarification process is another thing that came out of the person-centered way of being. But then not only awareness of values, or clients' awareness of values, but living with integrity to those values. To what extent is my life living out the things that are most important to me? And it's very, very common for us to not be living consistent with the things that we value the most. Hobart Maurer, who was a learning theorist, toward the end of his life, got interested in values and developed something called integrity therapy, just helping people to live consistent with the things that they want their life to represent. That can be true in motivational interviewing as well. A values focus or a values integration to MI. So a fourth way of thinking about self-actualization is becoming conscious of what you want your life to mean, becoming conscious of the values that you choose, and then working to have your life serve that, to be consistent with that. A fourth way of thinking about self-actualization. Then there's potential. Person-centered approach came to be called the human potential movement. Becoming aware of what's possible. And the top of Maslow's hierarchy, self-actualization is about the motivation, the desire to become all that you can be, to fulfill your potential. So what's possible for you? That's another way of thinking about it. If you work in career counseling, you know about aptitude testing. You can get paper and pencil questionnaires that may indicate abilities. So in testing, when the world wars happened, we had to kind of figure out quickly who to put in what specializations. So who's going to be good at what? Or just interest, the strong vocational inventory is about what are you interested in and helping people to wind up in careers that match well their own interests, their own things, their own cares and concerns. So what are the potentials of our clients? And in the book on hope, I say seeing possibility in other people is one form of hope. To see something that's possible for a person and help that to become reality, actualized, is a form of hope. It's a way of seeing and calling into being what's possible for another person. It's a real gift. Now here are three people whose names you've probably never heard and who were quite important in my own development. Walter McIver was the choir master at the college where I got my undergraduate degree. And I took his music appreciation course. And then he said, if you think you might like to try out for the choir, come on over and I'll listen to you sing. And so with a couple of other brave students, the three of us went over to sing and just, can we get into the choir? Because the choir was amazing. The sound that this fellow could produce was just astonishing. And I volunteered to go first, which I stupidly do pretty often. And he sat down at the piano and struck a note, says, sing this note like this, and then he kept going up the scale, and up the scale, and up the scale, and then got to a place. I said, that's all I can do. And he said, oh no. Oh no. I like what I hear. Did you know you were a first tenor? I didn't. Thought it was a baritone. I'd have a male voice, But he gave me the gift of my voice. That's been a gift for the rest of my life. I didn't know I could sing. And he heard it in my voice, and he called it forth. Then is J.J. McAuliffe, an Irish poet, lovely man, also a poet in the college where I got my undergraduate degree. And I inflicted on him my bad poetry. And he took time to read it and said, I hear things in there. You have some gifts for this, and let me help you with that. And he first of all, helped me with poetry, just to really love saying things precisely. Finding just the right words, and I still do that when I write books. He's with me, to find just the right way of saying something. I've not used too many words. But he brought alive in me my passion for writing, and I still love writing. I'm an unemployed writer now. That's my life. And I thank Jim for that. And then there's Lou Goldberg, famous psychologist in the psych department where I got my PhD. And I took his course in psychological assessment. And he wanted us to write a review of a certain area of assessment. So I picked motivation. And wrote everything I could find about motivation for a treatment. And I turned in the paper. But it not only got a good grade on the paper, he said, you could publish this. This is the quality that could go in one of the best journals. I said, really? I said, no, let me help you shape it up. It wound up in Psychological Bulletin, which is one of the top journals of the field, and was one of the only things I had on my resume when I was applying for jobs. And thanks to Lou, I wound up in an academic job, and it became my career. And I didn't know I could do that, but Lou did. So self-actualization can be discovering what you can do and developing that potential. Then one more, a word that you've probably seen me use, tell us. Tell us. Because writers began to describe the person-centered approach as directional. So it is moving in a particular direction. Say, let go of non-directive. So no, actually what you're doing is helping people move in a certain way. And he talked about the actualizing tendency. There is that in us that wants to be realized, wants to come to the light, wants to happen. And he saw it as very positive, very, very constructive. And that this is a huge motivation, that people want to fulfill their inherent potential. which he saw as positive. And Rogers really did believe that inherently we're good. Quite different from a view in psychoanalysis that what we are deep down is pretty dark. Or in behaviorism, that we're a blank slate and there's nothing there. I just said, no. There's real positive potential in people that wants to come forth. And I use the analogy of an acorn. It's like if you have an acorn, it wants to be something. If you put it in the ground, it's going to move in a particular direction if it has the right conditions. So it fit very well with Roger's understanding that what therapy is about is providing certain conditions that help the person to grow. And you don't have to make the growth happen. It naturally happens if you provide the conditions. So we're primed to move in a particular direction, a telos. And with MI, Steve and I similarly moved away from talking about MI as directive, which it was in the first two editions, to directional. There's direction to what we're doing, but it's not like we're in charge of that. So that was the balance of language that we were looking for. So it became directional in the third edition, and then in the fourth edition, not only direction, but helping people to grow. Here's what Roger said about human nature. Again, a wonderful conference he participated in that produced a book called The Nature of Man, the male language of the time. Man appears to be an awesomely complex creature who can go terribly awry, but whose deepest tendencies, our real nature, make for his own enhancement and that of other members of his species. I find that he can be trusted to move in this constructive direction when he lives, even briefly. That word is important, I think. Rogers thought even relatively brief exposure to someone who can provide these conditions, a teacher, a mentor, even briefly, in a non-threatening climate where he's free to choose in any direction, you can trust that people will move in a positive direction. That's what Rogers really believed. So it's an old Greek term. It's in biblical Greek. And it means your end purpose, your natural mature state, what you grow into. There's a verse in the Bible that says, be perfect even as God is perfect. It's easy to read that as don't make any mistakes. The word is telos. Be what you're meant to be. Mature in the direction you're meant to go. Become who you are. And that's the nature of God as well. So does each of us have a natural self? Something we're meant to become? Rogers thought so. And trusted that that's a positive thing. So, sixth, self-actualization can be becoming who you naturally are. The person you're meant to be. Trustworthy person you're meant to be. So those are 6 different ways you can think about self-actualization. Then just a couple more questions. What's being actualized in us as trainers? What are we becoming? What are we meant to become? What's happening to us as we spend so much time with motivational interviewing to understand it and try to do it well and try to help others learn how to do it? What's happening to us? Because I've heard so many stories, and you hear them too as trainers. People say, this changed my life. I was on the verge of burning out in my profession. And then I found this way of being and just sort of said, oh, yeah, this is the way I want to be. And what you help me to do is to know how to do it better, to think more clearly about the direction I'm moving in. And now I love what I do. So how does learning and developing skillfulness in motivational interviewing change the learner? These are anecdotes now. Data is not the plural of anecdote. But people tell me over time that learning and practicing motivational interviewing, they become more patient and more calm, more centered. They can go through crisis and chaos with people and be more of a calm center. More curious and interested. I want to know about people. People are amazing. They're just wonderful. I mean, what a profession to be in where you get to spend your life getting to know people at a level of intimacy that few people ever experience, or experience very rarely at least. And that's my job. Wow. Made me more compassionate, more empathic. That practicing accurate empathy teaches you empathy. Fortunately, you don't have to start with the spirit of motivational interviewing. Doing motivational interviewing teaches you the spirit of motivational interviewing. More accepting of differences. More okay with me that people are very different from myself. More forgiving of shortcomings, including my own. Just recognizing that's human nature. I can accept that. And work to move away from it. And if I were still doing research, this is what I would be studying. How does it change people to learn motivational interviewing and to practice it? Because I think it does. I hear enough stories like this, enough anecdotes, that this can have a substantial effect on people's lives and who they are. Which makes me wonder if we should get informed consent before we do MI. And then what's being actualized in MINT in our organization? These are the official values of MINT. A group of us came together to say, no, these are the things that we want MINT to be. These are the things we want MINT to represent. Quality, doing it well. We don't want to be the MI police preventing people from doing it wrong. We want to help people learn to do it well. That's what we want our lives to be about. And to pay attention as evidence emerges from research, to make changes in that, to respond to that. So to have quality be one of the things that we value. These are on the website, on the MINT website. Openness, to evolve. How motivational interviewing has evolved over time, even though some of it is still the same from the very beginning. I still read my first paper in 1983, and it's not bad. You know? A lot of that is still there. But to be open to change, to be flexible, to be able to move with your client, and with the evidence, and with what's happening around you. Humility is a part of that too. Not I've got the answer, but I wonder. Generosity, to give away, to give more than you get. One of the values that Steve and I have encouraged in MINT. To give more to MINT than you take from MINT. To give more to your clients than you take from your clients. To be generous with acknowledgement. To collaborate, to cooperate, to work together. And then respect, to value differences. Not just tolerate differences, to value differences. These are important. It matters. It's good for us to have diversity and variety and differences of opinion. But then act with respect, with kindness, with listening. So I could tell you, and in a way, my input to those values is part of what I think we ought to be. So I could tell you what I think is good about MINT, but instead I asked you, what do you value about MINT? This was a survey that I did in May of this year. And here in order of mention are the things that Minties said they value about Mint. Community was the most common. A sense of family, a sense of belonging. We're together in something that's kind of exciting and interesting. It's amazing to connect with people who are moving along the same lines. To have access to that community of people who are smart, interested, and empathic people who are wanting to do the same things with their lives that I'm trying to do. Collaborative. So I love the community. It's a very common one. I love the generosity that we tend to give away what we've learned. Not hold it like a guild and keep secrets, but say, here's what we found. It's on the website. The manual, our manual that Terry and Steve and I developed for training trainers is on the website. Not secret. So give it away. Even before I joined Mint, people were sharing with me the things that they said. There's a sense of mutual learning and generosity. So people value that. Diversity. I love the international community. To have cross-cultural experiences as we're having in this very room and meeting. We're all evolving. We're all changing together. And that it's okay to have different ways of doing and being in MI. And I love being connected to the variety of people that there are in Mint. Inclusion. To be welcomed as new Minties. I hope the new Minties who are here feel very welcome and already part of the community. That's something that people said they experienced in Mint. One said, offered the most affirming and uplifting experiences of my professional career. Oh, man, it's something very positive. Mentoring. Just learning from others and people willing to help you learn. Mint Plus is a manifestation of that. Both formal and informal mentoring. Learning from each other. Having some guidance, having some standards for what's good motivational interviewing. There's an organization I can look to that says, no, this is the direction we want to be moving in for quality. Valuing of the scientific basis. I'm so happy about that. I'm fundamentally a scientist. And from the very beginning, like Rogers from the very beginning, when Rogers said, when you have an hypothesis, when you have an idea about how things work, test it. And test it in a way that somebody else can test it. So you're not just saying this is the truth. You're saying, here's what I think, and here's the evidence that we have, and you can actually study it too and see whether it's true for you as well. That was part of Rogers from the very beginning and has been part of motivational interviewing from the very beginning. And gives us credibility also. People know that there's a scientific base here. By the way, I keep a log of controlled clinical trials involving MI, and we just crossed 2,400. I love finding new ideas. One reason I come to Mint forums is I learn new stuff. I think about things in ways I hadn't thought about before. And I appreciate that we're constantly moving forward. Now, researchers don't always value that. You're always changing stuff. How am I supposed to study motivational interviewing when you keep changing it? But the changing is something we value too. And research just has to keep up with us. And then feeling some connection to history. Can you believe the founders are still alive? So you have a sense of being a part of something that's been going for 40 years now. And not just going, but growing and evolving and developing and learning and vibrant. It's still active. I learn every time I come to these meetings. So people have valued that too. A few other things just got mentioned. I like being stretched, but gently, please. But being continuously stretched and challenged to reflect on my own practice. Yes, that self-reflection is something that we value too. When I believe something, to also be skeptical. Is that really true? Let me test it and find out. Having shared values, being in a room full of minties, what a wonderful experience that is. Yeah. Where we have fun together, but also have a kind of common sense of movement together in different ways towards some common goals. And people saying, this changed my life, which I hear most every time I do a training of some kind. So to some extent, this tells me we're actually living out the values that we say we have. If you look at those values on the website, the things that are being said by mentees here sound like we're getting there. We're not perfect. We mess up. There's times when we kind of do things we know that's not really consistent with the MI spirit or the MI way of being. Well, that's okay too. I accept that. But we know where we're trying to go. We know the horizon. We know what we're trying to move toward. So, may we choose to be accepting and appreciative, to become what we can be, to live up to our values, and grow toward what drew us to motivational interviewing in the first place. Thank you.